The world had been watching Iran, but it had not been listening. In the shadows of sanctions, isolation, and surveillance, a different Iran emerged, one that whispered not a surrender, but a strategy. And now, for the first time in decades, those whispers have turned into thunder. Iran has activated its secret alliances. Not one, not two, but many. And what follows may tilt the balance of global power forever. It began not with missiles or declarations, with silence, the kind of silence before a storm. Western analysts noted subtle shifts. Encrypted communications between Tehran and Damascus suddenly spiked. Oil tankers with obscure registry flags redirected toward Asian waters. Cargo planes landed in African capitals where Iran supposedly had no presence, but no one sounded the alarm. The West was distracted by its own noise. And then it happened. In the early hours of a moonless night, a joint military exercise was announced by a coalition no one expected. Iran, Russia, China, and Venezuela. While the world dismissed it as symbolic within intelligence circles, panic erupted. Because this wasn't just a drill, it was a rehearsal for a new order. What shocked the world wasn't just the display of power, but where it was happening. In the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian warships sailed alongside Russian frigates. In the Caribbean, Chinese surveillance vessels docked in Venezuelan ports. In Africa, drone bases, unknown until now, suddenly lit up on satellite feeds. These weren't isolated partnerships. These were nodes in a global network, hidden, now unleashed. In Baghdad, whispers circulated about a Red Crescent alliance, an informal pact binding Tehran to militias and governments across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, PMF units in Iraq, all received encrypted directives. They weren't told to attack, they were told to prepare. In Turkey, despite historical rivalries, new gas pipeline talks with Iran went from dormant to active overnight. In Qatar, high-level meetings between IRGC officials and Qatari intelligence operatives reportedly occurred under heavy secrecy. Even in Central Asia, old alliances rooted in the legacy of Persian culture were reactivated. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan all quietly began economic engagements with Tehran. The West responded with confusion. In Washington, Pentagon initiated War Game Helix, simulating potential scenarios if Iran leveraged its alliance web for asymmetric warfare. The simulations failed again and again because of brute strength, but because of unpredictability. Iran's partners weren't uniform. They weren't centralized. They were everywhere, and that made them dangerous. Then came the first true shock, a cyber attack unlike anything seen before. A virus known only as Ashura 9 took down banking infrastructure in 6 European countries. No group claimed responsibility. Embedded within the virus code was a single Persian phrase, Azadi Ye Marg, freedom or death. Within 24 hours, an Iranian diplomat in Geneva denied involvement, but smiled when asked if Iran had technological allies beyond the Middle East. That smile sparked headlines, because the world finally began to ask the question it had ignored for too long: who stands with Iran? And one by one, the answers came in. North Korea announced a scientific cooperation pact with Tehran. Bolivia and Nicaragua pledged economic unity under an anti-Western trade banner. Sudan and Eritrea opened air corridors to Iranian cargo jets. Even Turkey, a NATO member, abstained from condemning Iran's recent satellite launches. Silence became the new declaration. At the heart of this unfolding storm stood one-man General Esmail Qani, the quiet successor of Qasem Soleimani. Unlike his predecessor, Qani didn't seek fame, he sought reach. And with each alliance activated, it became clear he had achieved it. But this wasn't just about military power. It was about rewriting the script of global influence. Iran began exporting a new ideology, not Shia expansionism, but sovereign resistance. It resonated with leaders across Latin America, Africa, and even parts of Europe who saw Western dominance as hypocrisy dressed in democracy. Tehran became the nucleus of a new diplomatic axis, the global South rising. In Riyadh, the Saudi crown prince watched nervously. The Abraham Accords were under pressure. The Saudis had warmed ties with Israel, but now faced a growing regional front united not just by religion, but by resistance. Iran's alliance web had exposed a fragile truth. The Middle East was no longer a divided chessboard. It was a loaded fuse. Israel responded with intensity. The Mossad went on high alert. Targeted assassinations of Iranian scientists resumed. But for every strike, Iran seemed 2 steps ahead. A convoy in Syria would be hit, only for another to slip through into Lebanon the same night. Israel's famed intelligence was being challenged, and not just by Iran, by a whole silent intelligence ecosystem backing it. In Berlin, the European Union held emergency meetings. Sanctions were ramped up, assets frozen. speeches delivered. On the ground, Iranian oil still flowed to Africa, to Asia, to allies who had long stopped caring about Western rules. And then the unthinkable happened. India, a long-time balancing power, signed a major defense and energy deal with Iran, not just for oil, but for drone technology and cybersecurity collaboration. The world gasped. Washington reacted with fury. But New Delhi had already made its calculation. Iran's alliances weren't collapsing. They were accelerating. Even more shocking, Japan began back-channel talks with Tehran about reopening trade routes suspended since 2018. It wasn't out of sympathy. It was out of necessity. The US was loosening, and Iran's grip was no longer limited to its borders. The CIA's internal assessment changed tone. Iran is not acting alone. It is operating within a decentralized alliance architecture that transcends ideology, borders, and geography. This is not a return to the Cold War. It's the rise of something more fluid, an era of shadow alignments. Iranian television aired a simple message on state TV. Those who isolate us only unite us. Behind the screen, a montage played of world leaders shaking hands with Iranian diplomats. It was subtle, but the world heard it loud and clear. Suddenly, Iran wasn't the isolated rogue state. It was the orchestrator of a quiet global shift. Its missiles still mattered. Its nuclear file still haunted diplomats. But now, something more dangerous had emerged its influence. And this was just the beginning. The first true test of Iran's secret alliances came not from a battlefield, from a blockade. The US Navy intercepted and detained an Iranian cargo ship near the Gulf of Aden, claiming it was smuggling advanced weapons to Houthi rebels in Yemen. Within 48 hours, the consequences rippled far beyond that single vessel. In Djibouti, Russian naval commanders issued a rare public condemnation. In Caracas, Venezuela temporarily cut off crude exports to the United States, citing economic hostility. And in Beijing, Chinese state media broadcasted exclusive footage of Iranian-Chinese joint naval exercises, clearly timed, deliberately framed. The message was unmistakable. Iran would not be isolated alone. Its partners were watching, and they were ready to move. On the digital front, coordinated cyber strikes surged. Singapore Stock Exchange temporarily froze. Nigerian oil refineries went dark. The UAE's air traffic control systems experienced unexplained failures. No one claimed responsibility, but US cyber intelligence analysts found patterns in the code, faint signatures linked to Tehran, Pyongyang, and even Moscow. This was no longer a cyber war. It was a rehearsal for systemic disruption. Iran wasn't trying to defeat the West on the battlefield. It was choking it in places it didn't expect, in energy corridors, underwater cables, satellite bandwidth, and trade routes. It was playing the long game and playing it with partners equally tired of Western dominance. Meanwhile, Iran's soft power was blooming. Across universities in Africa, Iranian-funded scholarships rose by 300%. Farsi language centers opened in Dakar, Nairobi, and even Mexico City. Iranian humanitarian aid, once scarce, began to arrive in disaster zones faster than American or European help. It wasn't charity, it was strategy. In Pakistan, level military talks with Iran were leaked, revealing collaboration on border security, drone defense, and intelligence sharing. In Azerbaijan, traditionally skeptical of Tehran, new joint ventures in energy and telecommunications began to take shape. Iran had begun to achieve what few imagined, creating alliances across sectarian, ethnic, and even ideological divides. Inside Iran, the supreme leader addressed the nation, not with bombast, but with calculation. "We have waited, we have endured, and now we stand with those who refuse to kneel," he said. That speech echoed not just in Tehran, but in Caracas, Damascus, and even parts of Europe where anti-imperialist sentiments simmered under economic uncertainty. Israel's response turned fierce. In a daring airstrike, it targeted an alleged joint IRGC Hezbollah drone lab in northern Syria. Dozens were killed, but hours later, a coordinated barrage of cyber attacks hit Israeli banks, rail networks, and military communications. Tel Aviv blamed Iran. Iran denied. But that night, a hacker group calling itself the Resistance Net released a statement: "For every drop of our blood, we strike tenfold." Then came the economic quake. Iran, along with China, Russia, and Venezuela, launched an alternative financial transaction platform called SETAD-X, aimed at bypassing STOIFT entirely. Within 2 months, over a dozen countries began testing it. Suddenly, Iran wasn't just evading sanctions, it was offering the world a way to defy them entirely. At the United Nations, US diplomats struggled to build a coalition to impose tighter controls. But a shocking vote took place. India, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa abstained. Pillars of the so-called Global South were no longer interested in being pawns. And then the Middle East lit up. In Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah staged massive anti-US protests in Baghdad's Green Zone. In Bahrain, Shia-led demonstrations erupted, demanding severance of all Western military agreements. Even in Jordan, considered a moderate ally, pro-Iran sentiments surged as social unrest grew. Iranian influence wasn't just active, it was viral. Saudi Arabia recalibrated. Secret talks were initiated between Tehran and Riyadh through Omani and Qatari channels. The kingdom was not ready for a full-scale regional confrontation with a super network that stretched from the Caspian to Caracas. In Europe, public opinion fractured. Gas prices soared and Middle Eastern oil tankers turned eastward. Protests erupted in Rome, Paris, and Berlin. Why are we still the slaves of outdated wars? One protester's sign read, European leaders, once firm on Iran's containment, now whispered privately about engagement. And all the while Iran watched and waited, the old narrative had collapsed. Iran was no longer the corner threat. It was the grand connector, silent conductor of a new orchestra. Its alliances didn't march in step. They moved like smoke, flexible, asymmetrical, impossible to corner. Washington faced its deepest dilemma in decades. The White House's National Security Council briefed the president in a closed-door session. Their assessment was grim. Iran has achieved what we feared most, a deterrence not based on nukes, but on networks. Economic, digital, ideological, military. And every time we hit one node, another activates. The next trigger came from Africa. In Mali, a sudden coup brought a new government to power. Just days later, Iranian officials arrived to discuss energy partnerships. The French military presence, already dwindling, was forced to evacuate key bases. Across West Africa, Iran's fingerprints appeared, rarely obvious, always deniable. It was influence without flags. In Latin America, Tehran's footprint expanded too. Argentine intelligence leaked documents showing Hezbollah aligned operatives meeting with local syndicates. In Brazil, a senator was investigated for receiving funds tied to foreign resistance financing. Iran wasn't exporting war, it was exporting coordination. As Iran's alliances continued activating, a chilling pattern emerged. No longer did Iran need to lead every front. It had become the nucleus of momentum. Whenever a global power targeted one of its partners, another rose up elsewhere. It was a diplomatic hydra. Sanctions only strengthened its resolve. Isolation only deepened its alliances. Attacks only widened its reach. The final warning came not in a declaration, but a silence. Iranian media, once eager to showcase its rising power, suddenly quieted. Analysts speculated that something larger was underway. Rumors circulated about a pays black, a protocol that, if confirmed, would mean the transition from influence to action. No one knew what it meant. No one knew when it would begin. But across the world, from Washington to Tel Aviv, from Riyadh to New Delhi, from Tokyo to Berlin, leaders began to ask the same question in emergency war rooms and private bunkers. If Iran's alliances are only just waking up, what happens when they're fully awake? The world thought Iran was cornered. It was only crouching, waiting, not to strike alone, but to rise with a legion that no one saw coming. And now that they've awakened, the old world order may never sleep again.